So everyone, welcome to the webinar Convivencia Towards a Just Coexistence. Thank you for joining us today on this important topic, and especially a discussion that will shape the future of how we understand a meaningful coexistence, especially in an age of turbulence and also an age of what seems to be constant conflict. But within the Palestinian context itself, I think it is an important discussion as well that we are going to have today about what it means to have what it means for coexistence in this contemporary time. So I'm not going to take too much of your time, as I will be passing on the floor to our moderator, to Lisa Perez. So I would like to introduce Lisa. She is a presentation sister currently working in Goa, India, and she has spent some years in Palestine working with the Christian Peacemakers team in Hebron, Al-Khalil. And on her return after a holiday with her family, she was denied entry into Israel at Tel Aviv Airport. And clearly this has shaped quite a bit about her perceptions about what Israel is like as a state. And she is also now a member of the Indo-Palestinian Solidarity Network. And with that, I would like to pass the floor to Lisa. Lisa, you can take the floor and conduct the session.
So welcome everybody to this webinar today, which has been organized by the Movement for the Liberation of Nakba. MLN is a coalition of organizations and individuals from Southeast Asia, South Africa, Middle East, South Asia, Palestine, South Africa, and the UK, and its aims to disseminate knowledge about Palestine, Asia. It is a project of education and information on the history of Palestine, the 1948 Nakba, and the Palestinian minority inside Israel, the occupied West Bank, the besieged Gaza Strip, and the plight of millions of Palestinian refugees. It is also a project in solidarity with the Palestinian struggle for freedom and liberation, as well as a source of information and data about this struggle since its inception until today. The subject for discussion today is Convivencia. Convivencia is a cross-faith international initiative for a just peace in the Middle East. This is a better way forward than the current militarized solutions based on racist oppression, brute force, denial of rights, and colonial dispossession. The proposal is based on a history of shared values of the monotheistic faiths. It is also based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, especially its placing of responsibility on everyone to promote respect for these rights and freedoms. The call extends to people of all faiths and none who are committed to these values. Instead of dividing people, this approach unites them in a search for a just peace based on equality for all in Palestine, Israel. The intention follows the original PLO program towards building a shared political community through a process of decolonization, beginning with Palestine. This requires an end to Zionism, apartheid, and occupation, and building a just and democratic civic society in the whole of Palestine. We will hear more about this during the webinar today. I request all of those present, if you wish to have any questions, that you put them in the chat box so that we spend less time at the end. I will now introduce our first speaker, Dawood Abdullah. Dawood Abdullah is the director of the Middle East Monitor. He was a senior researcher at the Palestinian Return Center in London and lectured at the University of Maiduguri, Nigeria, and Birkbeck College, University of London. He served as Deputy Secretary of the Muslim Council of Britain from 2006 to 2010. He has edited, contributed chapters, and written several books. His most recent are A Century of Cultural Genocide in Palestine, and he's the author of Engaging the World, the Making of Hamas's Foreign Policy. We now welcome Dawood Abdullah to speak. You have 15 minutes, and I will give you, after 13 minutes, I will give you a call to tell you that it's time. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, and thanks to the organizers for your invitation to participate in this webinar today. I think it's a very important initiative, and I do hope that it will bear all the fruits that we expect of it. I want to focus on an issue I think is very important in the context of what is unfolding in Palestine today, and that is Jerusalem as a key to a modern convivencia. When we look back at the period of the convivencia between 1096 and up to the 15th century, at the demise, which ended at the demise of Andalus, we found that Jerusalem was always central to the relationship between Christians, Muslims, and Jews in the peninsula, the Iberian Peninsula. And it has remained so until today. The threats that are being posed to a harmonious relationship between the peoples of these three faiths are still rather being influenced by events in Jerusalem. Let me say that the concept or the term of convivencia is a precursor to what is called multiculturalism today, in which faith is important, but equally the humanity and the dignity of the individual is always respected. That, to my mind, are some of the distinguishing features of that period we are trying to address and to revive in a modern context. As I alluded to, the principal actors during this period were the monotheistic faiths. Now, in a sense, the status of Jerusalem and its integrity can be a barometer by which to measure the strength or weakness of our multicultural existence. Now, one of the most significant tributes I recorded of the convivencia is that written by Stanley Lane Poole in his classic work, The Story of the Moors in Spain. Toward the end of the 19th century, he wrote that Muslim Spain set to all Europe a shining example of a civilized and enlightened state. Faith was important, but learning was also important. Knowledge, you see, was central to that experience. So he continued, he said, students flocked from France and Germany and England to drink from the fountains of learning which flowed only in the cities of the Moors. Mathematics, astronomy, and botany, history, philosophy, and jurisprudence were all mastered in Spain and only in Spain. So this was crucial, you see, to the success of that experiment, in the sense that prejudice and ignorance are the underpinning forces of you know, the opposite of convivencia, which is, let's say, anti-Semitism or Islamophobia. These thrive on ignorance, they thrive on prejudice. And so the success of the experiment in Spain was due to the prevalence of knowledge, the widespread use of it at all levels of society. Now, let me just move on quickly. When the experiment came to an end, the last Muslim kingdom, Granada, fell in 1492. That was the year when Christopher Columbus, set out on his first voyage to what is called the New World. And it was significant. I found that he said to his patrons, Ferdinand and Isabella, that the proceeds from his voyage would be used to regain Jerusalem. They had lost Jerusalem. And he said to them that if you sponsor me, the proceeds, the profits from that venture will be used to regain Jerusalem. This was Columbus. Religion, faith was also proselytization of Christianity was also central to his undertaking. And we know that throughout the insuccess, even before that, other potentates in Europe, like James II of Aragon, advocated a crusade by which the conquest of Granada and the Maghreb would allow a southern Mediterranean route to Alexandria and ultimately Jerusalem. You see, so it's very central to the peoples of the three faiths. Now, the failure of the Crusades and the fall of Constantinople in 1453 spurred the pent-up ambitions among the Spanish to explore and seek expansion. So Ferdinand, for example, and they decreed that Muslims should be expelled from their realm in Aragon, Castile, and Granada. And they stipulated that the King of Portugal would only be allowed to marry their daughter if he expelled the Muslims. Now, that type of we may describe it as extremism. It continued, but it at the center of it was the importance of Jerusalem. So here we come in 1799 with Napoleon and his attempt to enter Palestine from Egypt, and his call upon the Jews of Asia and Africa to rally under his banner in order to take Jerusalem. You see, now, of course, his mission failed, his enterprise failed, but that sounded a warning to the British that they had a rival in the French for dominance and preeminence in this part of the world, the strategic part of the world. So what happened after this? Britain in 1838 appointed the first consul to Jerusalem, William Young, with the specific instructions to look after the interests of the Jews and their interest in Jerusalem. Yani, a few decades after this, Moses Hess, a German-born Jew, published his book, Rome and Jerusalem. He said, the state of the Jews, the state the Jews will establish in the heart of the Middle East will serve Western imperial interests and at the same time help bring Western civilization to the backward East. Three things can be said about this. That it reveals the intent was to establish a state in Palestine. Yani, this was before Herzl. This was before Herzl. We saw the intent to do what? Establish a state in Palestine, but that it was going to be a tool of Western imperialism, and that it was underpinned by racist notions. This was clear from Hess's writings. So it culminated, all of these, of course, we came to Herzl in 1897, and the consummation of that marriage between British imperialism and Zionist interests in 1917 with the issue of the declaration. Here we found here after the declaration, the U.S. State Department, its envoy to the Middle East, a certain William Yale. This is what he said just 2 weeks after. He said, the nurturing of a state in Palestine may grow to become in future a pure Jewish state, which may lead to the introduction of a new element in the East, another state to confront Islam, a state to protect the Swiss, and a people forever indebted to Britain. So this was the consummation of the marriage. The intent was what? To establish this state in Palestine. And as he said, you know, this American diplomat, it was a state intended to confront Islam. Surely, you know, in that climate, with that vision, with that intent, harmonious relationship or relations between the three peoples would be virtually non-existent. I want to move faster forward to where we are today and the last 10 years. in Jerusalem. The attacks on Masjid al-Aqsa, not only, I should say, also on Christian properties and interests. Over the last 10 years, we've seen 5 waves of major confrontations. In July 2014, October 2015, July 2017, February 2019, and May 2021. All of these confrontations, violent though they be, were instigated by the policies of the Israeli authorities. Now, this has provoked a reaction not only from the Palestinians or Arabs or Muslims, but also from the Europeans. They have not realized that their interests are threatened in Jerusalem. Of course, no action has been taken. But here we had the European Union saying, when, because of Israel's attempt to take over Greek church properties, attempts by settlement to take over Christian properties in the old city must be halted as they jeopardize the heritage and traditions of the Christian community. This is the EU. Of course, Jordan has also condemned what is happening. And then most recently, the Russians. The Russian Foreign Ministry said, we are deeply concerned about the situation regarding Christian presence in Jerusalem. Such a decision, the attempt to take over the Greek church properties, such a decision is predictably detrimental to interfaith peace and raises legitimate concerns about the position of Christians in the Holy Land. So these are my final words. If we go back a few years now to 2005, the outgoing UN Secretary General Kofi Annan launched something which was called the Alliance for Civilization. And significantly, the 2 countries which were supportive of the initiative were Turkey and Spain, both of whom were involved in the Convivencia. You see, Spain, of course, the theater where it mushroomed, and Turkey, of course, the power which brought an end to the Crusading period. Kofi Annan, in his final address to the General Assembly, said, we might think of the Arab-Israeli conflict as just one regional conflict among many, but it is not. No other conflict carries such a powerful symbolic and emotional charge among people far removed from the battlefield. He's telling us that if we don't resolve this issue here, we cannot enjoy good relations, globally, that what happens in Palestine impacts upon relations between the 3 faiths on a global level. So the Alliance in 2006, also in its report, and I conclude with this in its report, it says, we must stress the growing urgency of the Palestinian issue, which is a major factor in the widening rift between Muslim and Western societies. In this regard, it is our duty to express our collective opinion that without a just, dignified, and democratic solution based on the will of all peoples involved in this conflict, all efforts to bridge the gap and counter the hostilities among societies are likely to be met with only limited success. I hope that we would take some time to look at the initiative launched by Kofi Annan and encourage our governments.
You have 2 minutes to conclude.
Yes, and encourage those in authority, those who make decisions on our behalf, to look at this initiative so that we can benefit, humanity can benefit from the concept of a convivencia, that of good relations between peoples of all faiths, based on dignity, based on justice, based on their common humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawood Abdullah. Thank you for giving us a glimpse of the beginnings of what we hope for from this webinar today. I would now like to introduce our second speaker, Naomi Wimborne Idrissi. She is a media officer of Jewish Voice for Labor, founded in July 2017 to support Jeremy Corbyn and defend the right to advocate for justice for Palestinians in the Labour Party. Since 2004, she has been active in Jews for Justice for Palestinians and also the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. She is a professional journalist and a retired teacher. Thank you, Naomi, and the floor is yours now.
Many thanks, Lisa. Can everybody hear me all right? One has to check. Yes, I've learned a lot from Dawood's presentation. Thank you so much for that. You've looked at the background to Convivencia and its historical context, which was very, very instructive, and particularly the idea that we had communities then based on learning and understanding and a joint perception of what humanity should be like. And I find that very inspiring. And we should certainly promote Convivencia in that spirit. I'm speaking to you today from the house of a fellow activist in Peterborough, where a meeting was held last night to look at the Palestinian lives under occupation. And one of the contributors live on screen was Tariq Al-Tamimi from Hebron. And he explained there about the life that his grandparents and their antecedents led in Hebron before the existence of the Zionist state, at a time when Jews and Christians and Muslims did live together in harmony. And he told us very interestingly about the period when the Zionist settlement was starting to take hold seriously, and Palestinians were realizing the threat that it posed to them and the communities that they'd known for generations. And in 1929, unfortunately, this flared into communal violence, and that there were families like his own, Muslim families, who protected Jews at a time when Jews were actually being massacred. And I think this is also in the spirit that Dawood has outlined for us of the previous Convivencia in the Iberian Peninsula. Also, if we look at the funeral recently of Shireen Abu Akleh, the journalist tragically murdered by the Israelis, that again was a wonderful example of Palestinians coming together across the religious divide, across the communal divide, Jews, Christians, Muslims, and people of no faith, being attacked by the Israeli state in mourning for this wonderful woman. So that's just as a preamble. I wanted to focus, rather than the wonderful learned approach from Dawood, on a sort of more activist perspective. So I thought I want to say, as I said at the launch of Convivencia in London back in May, that we should look at the existing structures and organizations which purport to be promoting interfaith dialogue or a multi-denominational approach to the Middle East in order to identify a role for this new initiative, because there are others which purport to be doing what Convivencia wants to do. So in the UK, we have an Interfaith Foundation established by Tony Blair, former Prime Minister of this country, whose role in the Middle East, I think, is probably well known to all of you. So what does interfaith mean to somebody like that? Well, not what we intend, I'm sure. There is in the UK something called the Three Faiths Forum, which has been renamed recently the Faith and Belief Forum, and it purports to bring together Jews, Christians, and Muslims to discuss their differences and to try and promote understanding of the Middle East. But it fails to do so, and I'll have a look at why in a minute. There's another one called the Council of Christians and Jews. There's a group called Christians United for Israel, which proposes an alliance of Christians and Jews, largely from an Islamophobic perspective, as far as I can see. There are learned institutes such as the Wolf Institute, which has many excellent programs and lots of historical study and so on, but primarily it ends up being a purveyor of the Zionist perspective on this issue. So the problem with all these projects and others, I would mention also Solutions Not Sides. I don't know if that's known to people outside of the UK, but it's an initiative which goes into schools and tries to promote an idea of balance, of equality, of one side and the other side, which is not religiously based, but it does try and look at different sides of what they see as a sort of an equal battle, which we know is not the case. So that's another issue. The problem with all of these is that none of them accept what we know to be the case, that any sustainable solution has to be based on an anti-colonial and anti-racist perspective, and therefore an anti-Zionist. Most of them actually explicitly oppose such an analysis. They try and promote acceptance of the Zionist narrative by people who support Palestinian justice for Palestinians, and we know how contradictory that is. Justice and equality are broadly absent from their approach. So what are the forces that do promote justice and equality, which we know is required if there is to be peace in the future in that part of the world? Well, there are human rights-based and international law-based groups, and that we could add now certainly Amnesty International and B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights organization, to that list, having identified Israel as an apartheid state. Human Rights Watch, obviously many Palestinian groups such as the Institute for Middle East Understanding, Al-Shabaka, another very useful and important organization, and many pro-Palestinian boycott, divestment and sanction groups all over the world. So these are the groups which do put justice and equality and freedom for Palestinians, as well as everybody else in the Middle East, at the heart of their approach. So there are some Muslim organizations which adopt that perspective. There are some Jewish organizations that adopt that perspective, people as Ilan and I are very much aware and involved in. And there are very few Christian ones, however. I think this is a problem that Convivencia will have to approach for Christian organizations. In the UK, I can name an honourable exception, the Amos Trust, for example. They are very nervous of appearing to take a position which they know is opposed by many people of Jewish faith. And that's because of the history, obviously, of persecution that Jews have experienced in Christian societies for generations. And this will be a problem for us in promoting this interfaith, this multicultural approach that we want. But overwhelmingly, these values, justice, freedom, equality, are upheld by groups that are not explicitly interfaith groups. So there's a gap in the market, as I said at the launch of Convivencia, that needs to be filled. And I think it's very important that the project makes explicit what the deficiencies are of those existing initiatives which purports to seek a resolution. So basically, most of them, they normalize racism and settler colonialism. They accept the language of Zionism, promoting the idea of Jewish self-determination as being the crucial value that needs to be taken into account when looking at this whole conflict. I think that's obviously a very problematic position to take. They nearly all call for a two-state solution, which I know, this is for Palestinians to decide in the future, or the people who live in the region to decide. It's not for me as a British-based activist to determine. But I believe that the two-state solution ignores freedom, justice, and equality for Palestinians. And that's what we don't mind whether there's one state, two states, or multiple states, or no state. The question is freedom, justice, and equality guaranteed for all citizens of that, whatever state it is, including Palestinians? Most of these existing alleged multi-faith initiatives promote the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance non-legally binding working definition of anti-Semitism, which, as we've learned to our cost in the UK, particularly within the Labour Party, but more broadly, unfortunately, spreading through across society, it equates opposition to Zionism with hatred of Jews. Yeah. And it's very unfortunate that this definition has taken hold, certainly in Britain, to such an extent that all different identity groups are now demanding their own definition. And inevitably, a definition is promoted by a particular section of one or other community. So the IHRA definition is being promoted by mainstream Jewish organizations, which are universally and without exception Zionist. And Jews who have a different perspective are not allowed any input into how anti-Semitism is being defined. This is very dangerous. So working within that framework, as most of the existing so-called multi-faith initiatives do, is bound to fail. It cannot possibly succeed. A lot of these groups also give cover to Christian Zionism. And this is very interesting to me in Dawood's presentation, that he pointed out that the idea of a Jewish state as a bulwark of imperialism in the Middle East predates the developments of the Jewish Zionist movement. That's 1897, the World Zionist Organization was first set up. And prior to that, these ideas about placing what one British imperialist administrator called a little loyal Jewish Ulster in the Middle East as a bulwark against Arab barbarism. He actually said that, Ronald Storrs, who was governor of Jerusalem between 1917 and 1926, I think. This idea was very prevalent among Christians before it became mainstream among Jews, which actually wasn't until after the Holocaust, to be absolutely honest. So a lot of this Christian Zionism is behind many of these multi-faith initiatives. And it perceives the interfaith model as basically pressuring Christians and Muslims to work with Zionist Jews. That's what a lot of it is about. So we need an initiative which counters that. It's going to be difficult. And I think a successful project on the Convivencia model would have to create some new structures for faith-based organizations to formulate and promote an explicit analysis on the clear understanding that peace and coexistence depend on embracing justice for Palestinians. And that entails challenging the two-state rhetoric, which is still trotted out as a meaningless mantra by virtually every world leader and every political leader in Western countries, certainly. And also the IHRA definition. So I think I'll end there, actually, Lisa. I don't think I need my full 15 minutes. Dawood's already given people an awful lot to discuss and chew on, and hopefully I've added my little bit there. So thank you very much for this fascinating webinar. I hope we'll hear from the audience now. We'll soon, after Chandra.
Thank you, Naomi, for giving us a very clear picture of the many groups that are prevalent among the three different faiths, and which of them are really functioning for the issues of justice and liberation, and which are just cover-ups. Thank you very much. I now invite Dr. Chandra Muzaffar to respond to the two speakers. Dr. Chandra Muzaffar is president of the International Movement for a Just World. It's an international NGO based in Malaysia, which seeks to critique global injustice and to develop an alternative vision of a just and compassionate civilization guided by universal spiritual and moral values. He has published extensively on civilizational dialogue, international politics, religion, human rights, and Malaysian society. He's the author and editor of 32 books in English and Malay, and many of his writings have been translated into other languages. In 1977, he founded a multi-ethnic social reform group called Aliran, which he led for 14 years. Dr. Chandra is the recipient of a number of international awards related to his scholarship and social activism. Over to you, Dr. Chandra Muzaffar.
Thank you very much. Friends, thank you for this opportunity to share my thoughts on what I think is a very important topic, the challenge of living together in a multi-ethnic world. It is something which for us in Malaysia is a living reality. And we, for better or for worse, can appreciate the pitfalls which a journey of this sort presents us with. It is not something which is just academic, it is real. It is something that we have to come to grips with every day of our lives. Now, I will not respond to the two previous speakers, both excellent. I agree with all the points which Brother Dawood had made, and I think the work of the Convivencia Alliance in Britain is remarkable. It's a fantastic achievement, what they have been able to put together so far. And I've hardly come across a document dealing with inter-ethnic, inter-religious ties, which is so comprehensive and at the same time so insightful. I was listening to the speaker who followed Dawood. I thought it was a very honest presentation, looking at the real challenges one faces, especially when you have others parading as articulators of interfaith dialogue, and yet at the same time, they're pursuing a particular agenda, the Zionist agenda. And we are aware of the work of some of these groups, and we have responded to that on different occasions. In Malaysia, partly because he is a former politician, Tony Blair, and his attempts to speak as a bridge builder, they have come under some criticism, and rightly so. I will not go through all those things in this short presentation. What I would like to do is to look at this challenge of living together with Palestine as the backdrop. It would be wonderful, friends, if the Convivencia Charter, the document, could become a reality. But can it become a reality? This is what I would like to address. How wonderful if what is envisaged in the document could become a reality in our time, or even in the time of our children and grandchildren. I'm not sure if that is possible. This is not meant to be a criticism of their great effort. I think it is an effort which has to be lauded by everyone. But because one values this effort, I would like to look at some of the political challenges, partly because of my own disciplinary background. I would like to look at some of the political challenges that confront all of us. Number one, how far can we carry this idea forward in the sort of toxic environment that exists at the moment? Who would be interested in the principles of convivencia in a situation where there is so much distrust, where there is so much manufactured hatred, where there is more than that, killing, expulsion, occupation, oppression? How do we carry this forward? Because this is the reality that I think is something that we must keep in mind. It's not going to be easy at all. And what compounds this challenge is, if you look at the three faith communities, in each of these faith communities, there are vested interests that be totally opposed to this idea of convivencia. In all the communities, they will be opposed to this. Take the Jewish community. A segment of the Jews, for instance, would find it very difficult to accept the idea that you can have a state, a community, which treats everyone equally, which, in a sense, and this is real, negates the idea of an exclusive Jewish state. Because that's the idea on which Zionism and the present state of Israel is premised. And they would not be able to accept this. That you cannot have an exclusive Jewish state, you cannot have this notion of a chosen people who have got a right to a particular piece of land, that it is a right that is beyond question, beyond debate. It should be preserved and perpetuated ad infinitum. They will not allow this. If you take the Christians, for instance, again, like in the case of the Jews, you have a segment of the Christians who believe very strongly, I'm referring particularly to Christian Zionists and to those who are associated with them, who believe very strongly in the special position of Christianity as interpreted by them, that the ideology that they support is one which sees all the people in that part of the world converting to Christianity as a precursor to the return of the Messiah. For them, it is an article of faith. It is a fundamental principle of the ideology that drives them. It has no room, it has no place for Jews or Christians or people of other persuasions. How would they take to this idea of convivencia, of living together, of not just tolerating, but of appreciating one another, of establishing empathy, understanding between people who are different from one another at a certain level? I think that's going to be difficult. If you take the Muslims, the third community, for a lot of Muslims, what is special about Jerusalem is its theological place in Islam as they understand it. That this is the place that is associated with the prophets, peace be upon him, ascension to heaven. It is the first Qiblat in Islam before the Qiblat became Makkah, it's Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is special to the Muslims because it is seen as central to their faith. And what is central to their faith in that particular understanding is a relationship between Jerusalem and Muslims that others would not be able to share. The Christians, the Jews, and others. It endows Muslims with a special niche. That's how they see it. Again, it's an interpretation, like in the case of the Christian Zionists, a particular interpretation of their religion. In the case of the Jews, a particular way of interpreting the idea of the chosen people and all the rest of it. So it is a particular interpretation which has a very big grip upon the Muslim community. Jerusalem is special. This is why in some societies, Muslim majority societies, when they talk about the Palestinian struggle, they see it as an exclusive Muslim struggle. And very often do not acknowledge the role played by other religious communities, tremendous sacrifices of Christians and some Jews in the struggle for Palestinian independence and freedom. So we have a problem in terms of the ideological underpinnings of the three faith communities. So what do? Do we give up, knowing that this is a major challenge? No, that's the last thing that we should do. I think those of us who are committed to convivencia, who are committed to different communities living together, we have to go on. We have to continue to articulate this idea. It's so important. In spite of all the obstacles that we face, in spite of all the psychological and political barriers that confront us, we have to go on. And perhaps as a way of strengthening this ultimate goal, as a way of strengthening this ideal, whenever there are changes, whenever there are little victories here and there, we should celebrate. It may be little victories connected with perhaps a particular incident, with a particular move that one may make in the United Nations on behalf of the Palestinians. It may be a victory connected with the BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, divestment, sanctions movement. It may be another firm or company which has joined the boycott. It may be little victories of that sort. Perhaps we should celebrate them. That would be part of our struggle too. And that way we may move forward a bit. But it's so important for us to understand that underlying the differences are formidable challenges that we have to face as we go along. And I would like to argue, friends, that perhaps in terms of the actual struggle, we have to go beyond Palestine. Maybe that is the way forward. We have to go beyond Palestine. What do I mean by this? Perhaps the way to address this challenge in practical terms is to look at the larger challenge of global hegemony. That this is the real challenge. Global hegemony is sustained by the narrow-mindedness of groups within the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim communities. That's what sustains this edifice, global hegemony. Perhaps we should also focus on that. See how we can challenge global hegemony at every turn and corner. And this is what is happening on a massive scale. And we know it is happening. Today, more than at any time in the recent past, global hegemony is being challenged, which is why there is a certain reaction to this challenge. Ukraine is part of that. One need not be on this or the other side. In fact, we can take a very principled position, as many of us have done, condemning the invasion of Ukraine, but at the same time, emphasizing that that invasion was a product of NATO expansionism. And NATO expansionism, in turn, is a product of hegemony, of global hegemony. And we should not forget that at any point in time, that it is this challenge that we must keep in mind, even when we condemn the lives that are lost in this war and all the terrible things that are happening to the global food chain and all the rest of it. Let's not forget that there is yet another bigger problem, and that is the problem of global hegemony. Militarism, global militarism, NATO as an instrument, perhaps is the most powerful instrument of global militarism at this moment. It's NATO. NATO is a tool for that sort of dominance. And don't forget, when we talk about NATO, very quickly, I don't want to digress to this issue, but very quickly, NATO in its new role after the end of the Cold War, it was involved in countries outside its geographical sphere as a signal to the world that NATO is meant as an instrument for global dominance. What do I mean by it? NATO was involved in Afghanistan. And Afghanistan is not part of NATO's geographical sphere, but it was important to NATO to establish its power. NATO was involved in the bombing of Libya, again, outside its geographical sphere. So NATO had set itself a certain role. And this is what it's just been doing in Eastern Europe, expanding, trying to do what it can in order to weaken what it sees as Russia within the context of Eastern Europe and Eurasia. These are huge moves that are being made in terms of global politics and changes that are taking place in the global scene. But the point I'm making is, if we can also focus upon global hegemony and help to expedite, accelerate the demise of global hegemony, I think we'll be making a very big contribution to Convivencia, to different communities living together, because this is what we want to achieve. We want to have a different sort of world, and you cannot have a different sort of world as long as there is global hegemony which has as its fundamental principle the dominance of a particular nation, more than that, a particular civilization, and a particular race over the rest of humankind. And this is something that is unacceptable. So let us see that also in the context of our own struggle for living together among different communities, tolerance, equality, justice. That can only happen when you don't have global hegemony. And I think Palestine, and if you look at what had happened after the fall of Andalusia and all the rest of it, Zionism and its impact upon West Asia, these were early signs of the type of challenge that we're facing even today. Dominance by a particular power, dominance by a particular way of thinking, dominance which justifies, legitimizes the power of a particular people. Zionism has been very much part of this imperialism. But this imperialism is more than Zionism. It is power in itself, and we have to face this. So I see this as a major challenge, which is why I find that MLN, the movement for the liberation of Nakba, when it was set up, when it was established, we were very much aware of this, that it is not just Palestine. The struggle has to go beyond Palestine. The struggle has to focus upon hegemony, global hegemony also. And here we have a very good example, a living example. The desire for interfaith, intercommunity understanding, the excellent examples from history and how they were achieved, and what has been the obstacles since changes have taken place in the historical sphere. And I see this even in a country like mine, where different communities have lived together, and what had muddled their relationship was colonialism. So you cannot run away from colonialism and the neo-colonial structures that have followed suit in understanding interfaith relations. They have been a major obstacle, a major challenge. And we should not be detracted by attempts to get us to look at petty little issues, which happens very often in the interfaith attempts of people like Tony Blair, while we forget that there is this larger imperialism. Anyone who tries to discuss interfaith, intercommunity relations and ignores imperialism, ignores neocolonialism, ignores the changes that have taken place in the last few hundred years, which have been responsible for the way in which relations have deteriorated between communities, I think is deluding all of us. And it's that sort of delusion which our previous speaker had referred to from the Alliance, the Convivencia Alliance in Britain, and I think it is good that we are now focusing on that. I hope they will continue to look at this reality also, that we must continue to oppose global hegemony and relate global hegemony to the question of relations, of peace, harmony, of goodwill, of love, of understanding amongst people of different faiths, and not just the Abrahamic faiths. We have to bring in the non-Abrahamic faiths that are very, very important, because they're also very much part of this challenge now. They've been drawn into this. Look at what's happening in India, what's happening in Myanmar. Look at what is happening in other parts of the world. They've been drawn into this. And we live in a part of the world where these religions are also very real for us. And we believe so much in building bridges with these religions. I've been involved through Al Iran and later through Just in attempts to strengthen relations between Muslims and Buddhists, Muslims and Confucianists and others, because I think that is also part of this larger struggle. It is a struggle that confronts the whole lot of us, all of us, the whole of humanity. And this is perhaps the greatest challenge of our time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, for your global perspective on this whole issue of convivencia. I now invite Professor Ilan Pape to moderate the session for the question and answers and to give the way forward. Just to introduce Ilan Pape, he's an expatriate Israeli historian and social activist. He's a professor with the College of Social Sciences and International Studies at the University of Exeter in the United Kingdom. Director of the University European Center for Palestine Studies, and co-director of the Exeter Center for Ethno-Political Studies. Professor Pape was born in Israel. Prior to coming to the UK, he was a senior lecturer in political science at the University of Haifa and chair of the Institute for Palestinian and Israeli Studies in Haifa. He's the author of a number of books on Palestine. Professor Pape supports the one-state solution, which envisages a unitary state for Palestinians and Israelis. His work has been both supported and criticized by other historians. Before he left Israel in 2008, he had been condemned in the Knesset, Israel's parliament. A minister of education had called for him to be sacked. His photograph had appeared in a newspaper at the center for Target, and he had received several death threats. Welcome, Professor Ilan Pape.
Thank you, Lisa. I think it's time for me to change this biography. It has been many new and better things to say. Anyway, thank you so much, first of all, Naomi and Daoud, for taking the time. I don't know if people realize Naomi and Daoud are doing it on a Saturday morning in Britain and giving us the time and attention, and this should be doubly appreciated. And so thank you so much for your effort and so on. We have one question which I will read in a moment. And after that question, Daoud and Naomi will also have a chance maybe to respond or to add a bit to what, either respond to what others have said, or if they want to add something. And after we do that, I will give a few minutes of my own kind of intervention on this highly, highly important topic. So let me first go to the one question we have from a member of our board. Actually, there are two questions, so I will read them together so you can respond to both of them. Both of them are for veteran members of the MLN. And one is our dear friend Junaid Ahmad, who says, my own sense is that the term convivencia has the potential to be radically decolonial, in the sense that it rejects the idea that specific Eurocentric notions of secularism or a secular state that were bequeathed to us by colonial modernity are the only way to conceive of pluriverses for our communities to live together in mutually prosperous and healthy ways. I would be interested in what the speakers feel about this. Is it also a challenge to secularism in the Western interpretation of the term, namely secularism from above in many ways? And John Minto, our dear friend from New Zealand, asked, are there any initiatives to bring in non-Abrahamic religions into Convivencia, or is this another project? So one question is about secularism, one other question is of non-monotheistic faiths. And Daoud, would you like maybe to start, and then we'll ask Naomi to respond. And of course, Dr. Chandra, if you want to respond as well.
Well, while I acknowledge that that faith is important and has been central to the concept and existence of the Convivencia experiment in the Iberian Peninsula, I also emphasize that it was rooted in the notion that human dignity had to be respected, and that it was important to have justice for all peoples who live within that geographic reality. So when we speak of the inclusion of other faiths apart from the monotheistic faiths, I think in principle this should be accommodated, this should be considered, because the notion, the aim is not just to, let's say, protect Masjid al-Aqsa Mosque, but the ultimate goal is to end occupation, end the colonization of Palestine. And in that sense, there will be a role for all peoples of all faiths.
Oops. I'm muted myself. Naomi, would you like to respond?
Oh, yes, I support very much the spirit of what Daoud has just said. So the question, the question of secularism is an interesting one because, like many sort of pro-Palestinian Jews, faith is not central to the reasons for my opposing Zionism. It's the broader principles that Dawood has just outlined, that we're talking about justice and dignity as rights for all peoples. And I think these questions together are very interesting ones. Secularism in the UK is being challenged currently by actually mainly young Muslim critics who are pointing out that the mantra of secularism is often used as a way of portraying Muslims in particular as primitive and actually racist. You know, these terms are sort of turned against the community, which is in fact the butt of a huge amount of racism in the UK. And this is a global phenomenon since the war on terror post 9/11, when Islam has been painted as a sort of barbaric force that needs to be combated. And this is, of course, extremely dangerous and reprehensible and needs combating. So I think raising the question of the role of secularism is valid. However, I just want to say I agree with Dawood that the different, whatever faith tradition we come from, or whether like myself, faith is not the central factor in my life or the reason for my activism, we need to be embracing people from all traditions, and we need to be clear that the ideal that we are working towards would entail respect for all human beings, whatever their traditions and whatever their beliefs and whatever their religious faith or lack thereof. I think I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi. If I may add, and maybe this would be of my contribution, my very short contribution to this discussion, in a way, of concluding remarks as well. I think what I really enthused me about this initiative, that it tied in to some work we have been doing as scholars on, not only on Palestine, on the Middle East as a whole, since we were aware that part of what we are doing in academia is decolonizing the knowledge about the Arab world, Islam, and the Middle East. And one of the most important features of our effort to decolonize knowledge about the Middle East is to look back at certain patterns of existence and even coexistence in the Arab world, and in particular in the eastern part of the Arab world where Palestine is located, and to see that actually a certain way of life where identities, collective identities of communities that were based on culture or religion or ethnicity were respected, and people found a way of living next to each other, respecting both individual rights but also collective rights. And these group identities were not rigid. They were actually quite flexible and enabled people to live in the same village, in the same town, to celebrate each other's festivities, to participate in each other's moments of calamity and sorrow. And much of it, especially in Palestine, was destroyed by the Zionist movement in 1948, by Western colonialism and imperialism in Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq. And I'm sure this is also true about North Africa and some other parts of the world. So what we're doing here is not just, I think, talking about giving the real meaning to interfaith, which is very important. And I'm very glad that this is what we are talking about. And I agree with Dr. Chandra. We are also here challenging a global hegemony that would reflect, by reflecting better, people's aspirations and not just cynical ambitions of political and economic elites. We are also, in a way, telling the people who have lived for centuries in the Eastern Mediterranean, where Palestine is located, that their traditions that were destroyed by Zionism and imperialism and enabled a certain coexistence can still be reenacted, can re-emerge as part of an attempt to deal with issues of social justice, human rights, and civil rights, not only in Palestine, but also in places such as Syria, Iraq, Libya and Yemen, which are in dire need for a political solution, as so many people there suffer from poverty, oppression, and violence. And therefore, I think that this initiative has a great chance of appealing to many people who feel that the modern nation state that was created after the First World War in the Mashriq, as we call it, in Eastern Mediterranean and other parts of the Arab world, that the modernization that benefited the few but disadvantaged the many, that there is an initiative here that does not only look at the future in an optimistic way, that is anchored in the positive legacies of the past, that both Zionism and imperialism try to convince us were the main obstacle for quality of life, survival, and existence, which was not true. So I really think that we should continue this project to work with also scholars, especially the young scholars, there's so many of them now, who work on the period of the pre-Zionist period in Palestine, on the Ottoman period, in the Arab world as a whole. There is a lot to be learned from this journey into the past in order to build a better future. And this, in many ways, I think what Junaid was referring to, you decolonize knowledge by also building a different genealogy of the past, by reviewing the way the past was presented and depicted by people who had interests, political interests, economic interests, strategic interests, which went to benefit them, but not the people of the area. And we, for example, in my own university, in the University of Exeter, we are devoting a whole team to what we call decolonizing knowledge, which include also the way we will teach about the history of Britain, not just the history of Palestine and the history of the United States and the history of slavery. All these issues that we think that may have been behind us because scholarship has already kind of given us all that it can give is not true. There's so much to be done there, and it should not be done separately as an academic project and as an activist project. It should be done together. We are facing an elite coalition of political and economic forces that want to maintain this colonization, that want to maintain the benefits of colonization. Now, if we want to decolonize and challenge that elite, we have to have an intersectional joint effort by academics, by activists, by politicians who are willing to join us and do it together and not autonomously. And it's something in this initiative that I think really creates the infrastructure for such an umbrella. So I hope it will not remain within a certain group of people, that we would widen it up, making it global, dealing with global issues, dealing, as Dr. Chandra said, with global hegemony. I think this would be a powerful platform, and you'll see how many people would identify with that platform, because the past is still here, and the past is not all negative, and the past is not something that should be forgotten, and the erasure and the memoricide and the attempt to create a certain narrative where Europe and the West brought blessings by putting the past behind is all currently challenged again, and rightly so, in order to build a future that has roots in the past, in tradition, in the history of genuine coexistence that we experience in Palestine and Lebanon and Syria, for instance, before imperialism and Zionism created a divide and rule tendency and policy that penetrated not only through the structure of nation states, but also through sectarianism and pitting groups one against the other, even in small places. And we still see this policy enacted in Israel, all over historical Palestine. And I think that we should not deal with it only locally, but also globally. So thank you very much, everyone. This was really, for me, a beginning of a thought process that is not abstract, not disconnected from reality. And I can tell you that by sharing it with people in villages in Palestine and talking to my friends in Lebanon and Iraq and so on, this is something that appeals to people much more than we sometimes tend to have these more postmodernist conversations of deconstructions and so on, and post-structuralism. We have here a language that relates to reality and relates to the potential of changing reality. And we should keep that either as academics or as activists. And I'm sure the MLN would love to be an important part of disseminating the initiative and contributing to it as much as we can. Sorry, someone is up. I thought I turned it on. Turned it off. I think this is it, unless I didn't miss any question. I want to thank everyone. Unless someone wants to say something, we still have a few minutes. No, thank you so much. Ranjan, you're saying something, but you are unmuted. You're muted. No, you're still muted. I'm sure it's very important, but
no, not well. I said there were two participants who raised their hands. One Zakia Khan.
Yeah, but we said that we wanted writing. I think it's very difficult if we do it by.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah,
so yeah, I think it's difficult as it is for old geezers like myself to moderate. If you mix right into the mixing, hands rising. Next time we'll choose a younger moderator.
No.
Who are computer whiz and anyway. Okay. So Ranjan, do you want to maybe if you're already on?
No, I don't have
You
anything
don't want
to say. I'll leave it with you.
So I want to thank again Dr. Chandra, Dawood Abdallah, Naomi Wimbron Idrisi, the team of MLN, everyone who participated. This meeting was recorded. So if you know of anybody who missed the meeting because of the time and so on, please encourage them to look for the recording and be in touch with us in the MLN if they have any further questions. We can also further the questions and comments to our friends in the initiative, Dawood and Naomi, and you can also continue the dialogue with them. And I do hope, Dawood and Naomi, to have you back again after a while to see how the initiative developed, and we will be very intrigued to know what are the next stages and how they unraveled in the future. So thank you, everyone, and God bless.
I just want to say the last word on behalf of MLN. A very sincere thanks to Naomi, Dawood Abdullah, Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, and Professor Ilan Pape for your excellent presentations today. And this has been a very important webinar, and we have been very enlightened by many of the things that you have shared today. So thanks to you, and thanks to all present who have made time to attend this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye, and have a good day, good evening, and good night.
Everyone, thank you very much. Thank you for coming. So as per the chat, if you want to also look for more information, please visit our website. And also the recording will be on our Facebook page and YouTube page. So if for anyone who may have questions further, you can post your questions there and we can bring it up maybe even in the next webinar.
Good idea.
Yep. So thank you, Lisa, for moderating. Thank you, Professor Pape, Naomi, Dr. Dawood, and Dr. Chandra. Thank you so much. So we'll see you all next time in our next webinar. So you can keep updated through our Facebook page and our website. All right. Thank you.
Great.
Everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Asanal.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye then. Bye-bye. Thank you, Ilan. See you. Thank you, Dawood. Lisa,
Bye.
Chandra.